Hey everyone, and welcome back to AI Paper Podcasts. We're diving deep into a paper that's making waves in the AI community today.
Yeah, it's called Simplifying Dyno via Coding Rate Regularization.
Catchy title.
Yeah, it is catchy. And you know what? It's all about this idea of making these self-supervised learning models that we all love so much a little bit less complex, a little bit easier to work with.
That's so much, yes.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are tuning in for our short form version, here's the TLDR, DINO and DINOv2. There are these really, really powerful self-supervised learning models for image representation learning. But they're known for being kind of a beast to train.
Yeah, they are.
You have to walk this tightrope with your hyperparameters.
Yeah, you do.
To avoid this thing called representational collapse.
Yeah, that's right. And representational collapse. I mean, this is a pretty common problem in contrastive learning. And it's basically when, instead of learning to distinguish between different images, the model just says everything's the same. Right. It gives you the same output representation. It doesn't matter what you put in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like trying to train your dog to identify different breeds, and it just barks at everything.
Exactly. It's like, whiff, bird. That's all I know.
It's like, yep, that's a dog.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But not that useful.
Not really helpful if you want to do anything interesting.
Exactly.
So the original DINO and DINOv2, they use all sorts of tricks to prevent this collapse. But these tricks, while they work, they make training really complex.
Yeah, they add all these layers.
Yeah, they do.
Complexity.
Exactly. And they rely on things like these weight-normalized linear layers, sometimes called Dyno heads.
Dyno heads. I love it.
I know, right? It's a great name.
Yeah.
And also things like centering operations and these temperature-weighted softmax calculations.
Yeah.
And all of these things can be very, very sensitive to the hyperparameters you choose.
Yeah, and those hyperparameters can really make or break your model sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
You tweak one thing a little bit too much, and the whole thing just falls apart.
Yeah, it's like a house of cards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this new paper that we're talking about today, Simplifying Dyno, it's like they heard our cries for help.
Yeah, it's like they knew. They knew we were struggling.
They were like, we see your pain, and we're here to make it better.
We gotcha.
So what is this secret sauce that they're using? What's the magic ingredient here?
Well, they introduced this thing called a coding rate regularizer.
Oh.
And it directly addresses the problem of representational collapse by penalizing the covariance of the features that the model learns.
So it's a more robust way of ensuring that the model learns diverse representations without relying on all those intricate mechanisms that we were talking about before.
Exactly. It's much more direct.
Okay, so this coding rate regularizer, is it added to the loss function during training?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It becomes part of the objective that the model's trying to minimize.
You got it.
And the results are amazing. I mean, they actually show that these simplified models, which they call SimDino and SimDINOv2, right? So very catchy names.
I like it. Yeah, it keeps it simple.
Yeah.
So they show that these simplified models not only achieve better performance on all sorts of downstream tasks, like image classification and object detection, semantic segmentation.
But they're also way more robust to changes in hyperparameters.
Way more robust.
Which is huge.
It's a game changer.
That is a game changer for anyone who spent, hours and hours trying to fine-tune these models.
Absolutely.
So in a nutshell, this paper is basically presenting a way to simplify self-supervised learning models, making them easier to train and even more effective.
And more effective, yeah.
So for all you AI researchers and ML engineers out there listening,
this is one you got to check out.
Yeah, you don't want to miss this.
Absolutely.
All right, so now, for those of you who are sticking with us for the full deep dive, let's actually unpack Dyno a little bit and how it works. Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, let's get into the weeds.
So Dyno, right, which stands for self-distillation with no labels. It's this really cool self-supervised learning approach that uses contrastive learning to learn these really powerful image representations.
Okay.
And the idea is, imagine you have an image of, say, a cat.
Okay.
And you create all these different views of this image by applying different augmentations, like cropping it, rotating it, maybe changing the colors a little bit.
So we're just basically messing with the image a little bit.
We're just creating slightly different versions of the same image.
Okay.
And the goal of contrastive learning is to make the model learn features such that these different views of the same image are considered similar, while views of different images are considered dissimilar.
Okay, so it's basically like we're training the model to understand that like a cropped cat is still a cat.
Right.
But a cat and a dog, like those are different things.
That's a good way to put it. So now Dyno uses two networks for this whole process.
Okay.
We have a teacher network and a student network.
I've heard of this before.
Yeah, it's a pretty common setup.
Yeah.
And the student network learns to produce representations that match those of the teacher network. And then the teacher network is updated using the student's weights.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's like this self-distillation trick.
So it's like they're both learning from each other.
They are, yeah.
Okay, cool. So we've got these different views of an image.
Right.
We've got our student and our teacher. How does the actual training process work then?
So for each image in the training data set, Dyno samples a bunch of different views.
Okay.
Some local views, which are like smaller crops of the image, and a global view, which is like a bigger chunk of the image.
Okay.
And then these views are fed into the network. So the local views go through the student network and the global view goes through the teacher network.
Okay.
And each of these networks produces this aggregate representation, which is basically like a feature vector that kind of summarizes what's in that view.
Okay.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
And then you might think,
okay,
well, we just compare these representations from the student and teacher networks.
Right.
And calculate our loss, right? But no, there's a twist.
Okay.
This is where those tricks to prevent representational collapse come in. And things get a little bit more complicated.
Okay, I was afraid you were going to say that.
Yeah.
But I'm intrigued.
I know you are.
So tell me more.
All right, so instead of just directly comparing the representations from the student and teacher, Dyno does some extra stuff.
Okay.
Because if it just compared them directly, there's a risk that both networks would learn to just output the same generic feature vector.
Okay.
No matter what the input image is.
So it's like those bird watchers we were talking about before.
Exactly.
Calling everything a bird.
Yeah.
Not really differentiating.
Nerd.
Between a hawk and a robin and, a penguin.
Exactly.
Not helpful if you're trying to build a bird identification app or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
How do we avoid that?
Well, that's a great question, and that's what we're going to talk about next time.
Okay, cliffhanger. I can't wait.
I know. Stay tuned.
We'll be right back.
To avoid that representational collapse we were talking about, Dyno introduces these weight normalized linear layers on top of the student and teacher networks.
Oh, okay. So these are sometimes called Dyno heads, right?
That's right, yeah.
I love that name.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So what do these Dyno heads do?
Well, they basically project the initial representations into a much higher dimensional space.
Okay, so they're basically like taking those initial feature vectors and just like blowing them up.
Yeah, they're making them way bigger.
Okay.
Increasing the dimensionality significantly. Yeah. And I'm assuming this makes it harder for the model to collapse because it's now working in a much larger space, right?
Yeah.
Like there's more room for those representations to spread out.
That's one way to think about it, yeah.
Okay.
And then after these linear projections, Dyno applies the centering operation, which subtracts a learned centering vector from the teacher's output features.
Okay, so why do we need to center things?
Well, it's actually a clever way to implicitly incorporate negative samples into the training process.
Okay, I'm a little confused now because I thought we were already doing contrastive learning, right? Where the goal is to make features from different images dissimilar.
We are.
So why do we need these extra negative samples?
Well, by centering the teacher's output features based on the statistics of the whole batch, Dyno is subtly encouraging even more dissimilarity between representations from different images.
So it's like this extra push to prevent those representations from getting too cozy with each other.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Okay, I like it.
And finally, Dyno applies this temperature-weighted softmax function to both the students and the teacher's outputs.
Okay.
And this converts those high-dimensional feature vectors that we've been talking about into probability distribution.
Okay, so each element in the vector now represents a probability.
Exactly.
Okay, and then these probabilities are compared using cross-entropy to calculate the loss.
That's the whole process.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of steps.
It is.
No wonder Dyno is known for being so complex.
Yeah, it's a pretty intricate pipeline.
And remember, all of this hinges on carefully tuning those hyperparameters.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like, if you're not meticulous about setting those parameters just right, you can end up with a model that just doesn't learn anything.
You could totally throw off the balance and the whole thing just falls apart.
Okay, so that's Dyno in a nutshell.
Right.
Now, how does SimDINO address this complexity?
Well, SimDINO takes a much more direct approach. Instead of all those post-processing steps that we just talked about, it works directly with the initial aggregate representations from the student and teacher network.
So the ones that come out before all those projections and centering operations.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And it just normalizes these representations to lie on a unit hypersphere.
So each representation becomes a point on the surface of a sphere.
That's right.
Okay, cool.
And then to capture that essence of contrastive learning, SimDINO just calculates the squared Euclidean distance between the students and the teacher's normalized representations.
So a smaller distance means the two views are more similar, right?
Exactly.
And a larger distance means they're more dissimilar.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, and this distance is directly incorporated into the loss function.
Right.
Okay, so far so good.
So far so good.
But how do we prevent those representations from all collapsing into a single point on that sphere?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question.
That's where the coding rate regularizer comes in.
That is exactly where it comes in.
Okay, tell me more.
All right, so the coding rate regularizer is really the key to SimDINO's simplicity and its robustness.
Okay.
And it works by explicitly penalizing the covariance of the students' normalized representations.
Okay, so break that down for me. How does penalizing covariance actually prevent collapse?
Okay, so imagine this, right?
Okay.
If the student network always outputs similar representations no matter what the input image is, all those representations are going to be clustered together on the sphere.
Okay.
And that means they'll have high covariance.
Because they're all close to each other?
Exactly.
Okay.
So by penalizing this high covariance, the coding rate regularizer forces the student network to learn representations that are more spread out on the sphere.
Okay.
So it's capturing a greater diversity of features.
So it's like you're pushing those representation points away from each other so they don't all clump together.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
It directly addresses the issue of collapse without needing all those complex dyno heads and centering operations and softmax calculations that we were talking about before.
But we're basically just getting rid of all that extra stuff.
We're cutting to the chase.
Yeah, keeping it simple.
Keeping it simple.
Okay, so with SimDINO, we've got this much simpler process.
Right.
Normalize the representations, calculate the distance between them, and then add this coding rate regularizer to the loss function.
That's it.
Okay. And you said earlier that this leads to better performance.
It does. It really does.
Wow. Okay, that's impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about DINO V2.
Okay.
And how it builds upon the original Dyno.
Right. So DINO V2, as you might recall, has these two main goals. It wants to learn an aggregate representation that captures the overall semantics of an image.
Okay.
Like what's in the image.
Yeah, the gist.
Yeah, the gist. And then it also wants to learn these more detailed patch-based representations.
So it wants to know both the what and the where in the image.
Exactly. It's like going from saying this is a bird to saying this is a robin and its beak is here and its wings are there.
I see.
Right.
Yeah, much more specific.
Much more fine-grained understanding.
So how does it achieve this more fine-grained understanding?
Well, DINO V2 borrows some ideas from this other framework called IBI.
Okay.
And the first idea is masking, which involves randomly hiding some of the image patches before feeding them to the student network.
So the student network has to try to figure out what's in the image, even with missing pieces.
Exactly. It's like a puzzle.
Yeah, that sounds challenging.
It is. But it's this challenge that forces the model to learn those more detailed patch-level representations.
Okay, I see. So it has to actually predict the content of those masked patches based on what's around them.
That's right.
If it could do that accurately, it probably has a pretty good understanding of the image structure, right?
Exactly.
And how different parts of the image relate to each other.
Right. It's building up this deeper understanding.
Okay, and what's the second idea from IBIT?
So the second idea is the comparison of patch-based features.
Okay, so instead of just comparing those aggregate representations that summarize the whole view,
right?
DINO V2 also compares the representations of individual patches between the student and the teacher networks.
That's right. And this encourages the model to align its understanding of not just the whole image, but also its individual components.
Okay, so we've got masking, which forces the model to learn detailed patch-level representations.
Right.
And then we've got this patch-based feature comparison, which ensures that those representations are consistent between the student and teacher networks.
Exactly. It's like a double whammy.
Okay, and this dual focus on both aggregate and patch-level representations is what allows Dyno V2 to achieve those really impressive results that we were talking about earlier.
That's right. Yeah, it's a powerful combination.
Okay, so now I'm guessing that SimDINO V2 takes a similar approach to simplifying Dyno V2 as SimDino did with the original Dyno.
You are correct.
Okay, so tell me about it.
All right, so SimDINOv2 keeps those key innovations of Dyno V2, the masking and the patch-based feature comparison, but it streamlines the overall pipeline.
So it gets rid of all those complex Dyno heads and softmax calculations.
Oh, exactly. We're simplifying things again.
Okay.
So just like SimDino, SimDINOv2 normalizes the students' and teachers' representations.
Okay.
Both the aggregate and the patch-based ones.
Got it.
And then it calculates the squared Euclidean distance between these normalized representations. And it incorporates both the aggregate level distance and the average patch level distance into the loss function.
So it's still contrastive learning.
Right.
But we're using this more straightforward distance-based comparison.
Exactly.
Okay. And to prevent collapse. We're still using the coding rate regularizer.
That's right. It's the magic ingredient.
I like it.
Yeah, it ensures that both the aggregate and patch-based representations are nice and diverse.
Okay.
And they're capturing all the richness of the input images.
So SimDino2 keeps the best of Dyno V2.
Right.
Simplifies the comparison process. And leverages the power of the coding rate regularizer.
Exactly.
And I bet this simplification doesn't come at the expense of performance.
You would be right. It actually leads to even better performance on downstream tasks.
No way.
Way.
Wow. It's amazing how streamlining things can sometimes actually make them work better.
It's counterintuitive, but it's true.
Yeah.
Sometimes less is more.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the theory behind these models, but let's get down to brass tacks here.
Yeah, let's talk results.
How do these SimDino models actually perform in practice?
Well, let's move on to that then. The paper actually presents a really thorough evaluation across a bunch of different tasks, and the results are pretty impressive.
Okay, good, because we need some hard evidence to back up all this talk of simplicity and performance boosts.
Absolutely. So let's start with ImageNet classification.
Okay, the gold standard.
Yeah, exactly. The classic benchmark for image recognition models. And both SimDino and SimDINOv2, they outperform their original counterparts across different VIT architectures.
So they're doing a better job at recognizing those ImageNet categories.
Exactly. They're more accurate.
Okay, give me some numbers. What kind of improvements are we talking about here?
Well, for example, SimDino with a VITB backbone achieves a top 1 accuracy of 77.3% on ImageNet.
Okay, and how does that compare to the original Dyno?
Well, Dyno with the same backbone gets about 76.3%, so it's a decent jump.
Yeah, that's a solid improvement. And what about more specialized tasks like object detection and semantic segmentation? How do they perform there?
They do really well there too. The paper shows consistent performance gains on both of those tasks.
Okay, so they're not just good at recognizing objects, but they're also good at figuring out where those objects are in the image.
Exactly. They can localize them and understand the scene structure.
So whether you're building a self-driving car that needs to spot pedestrians, right, or a medical imaging system that needs to segment tumors, these SimDino models seem up to the task.
Yeah, they're pretty versatile.
And the performance boosts don't stop there.
They don't.
The paper also reports some impressive results on video object segmentation.
Yes, using the Davis 2017 benchmark.
And for our listeners who might not be familiar with this particular benchmark, video object segmentation basically involves tracking specific objects across multiple frames in a video.
Right, so you need to understand not just what's in each frame, but also how things are moving between frames.
It's like object recognition, but on steroids.
Exactly. It's a lot harder, and yet the SimDino models, they excel in this domain too.
Wow.
Outperforming the original Dyno models and showing that they can capture these complex spatiotemporal patterns.
So we've got simpler training, better performance across a whole range of tasks.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, don't forget about increased robustness.
Oh, right. You mentioned earlier how Dyno and DINOv2 can be really sensitive to those hyperparameter choices.
Yeah, they're kind of finicky.
But the sim versions are much more chill.
Yeah, much more robust thanks to that coding rate regularizer.
So we don't have to stress out as much about finding those perfect parameter settings.
Exactly. You can relax a little bit.
I love it.
The paper shows that SimDino can handle variations in hyperparameters that would totally derail the training of the original Dyno.
Now that's impressive.
Yeah, and this robustness opens up some really exciting possibilities.
Like what?
Well, for one, it makes self-supervised learning more accessible to a wider range of users, including people who might not have the deep technical expertise to fine-tune these complex models.
Yeah, democratizing AI. I love that idea.
Yeah, and it also allows researchers to explore new ideas and experiment more freely without worrying about breaking things.
Right, because you're not walking on eggshells anymore.
Exactly. You can be more bold in your experimentation.
And this could lead to even faster progress in the field.
I think so, yeah. It's a really exciting development.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into simplifying Dyno via coding rate regularization, what's the key takeaway for our listeners today?
I think the takeaway is this: sometimes less is more. By stripping away complexity and focusing on the core problem, you can achieve these breakthroughs that benefit both performance and accessibility.
I like it.
SimDINO and SimDINOv2 are great examples of that principle in action.
Well said. And for those listeners who want to really dig into the nitty-gritty details of these models, we highly recommend checking out the full paper.
Absolutely. Lots of good stuff in there.
And that concludes our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to subscribe for more fascinating explorations of the latest AI advancements. Until next time, keep those algorithms humming.